Richard.
Hi, thanks. I missed in the introduction, is time pairing there?
No.
Okay, so when I was reading Jeff's article, I was struck by its resonance with an article that I ended in the CCAR Journal in spring 2006, so I'll speak for him for a moment, called Rabbi is Mora Derech Chaim, which for Jeff, that he was unfamiliar as a rabbi as like a guide to spiritual life, for lack of a better translation. And I think it resonates very much with Jeff's article about the imagery or the metaphor of guide. I wanted to ask Jeff if he could tease out a little bit without getting too technical about consultative terminology. The similarities and differences between the image of coach and the image of guide. I see some of that in the article, and from some of what Jeff just said in the last 20 minutes, I'm kind of inferring that a guide takes you to resources and guides you along things you wouldn't necessarily discover on your own, and saves you from going off in wrong directions and detours and other ways we could kind of beat this metaphor to death. And the coach is more of an individual relationship model, sort of drawing out resources that are latent or dormant or available but not at the surface. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the two paradigms.
Sure, thank you, Richard. That's a good question. The way I think about it is that the guide is very knowledgeable of the landscape, sort of has some expertise in the area of what's available and how to get to it in a way that is that's promising and has gone there with others, has a sense of both what's available and maybe isn't sort of an expert on the student as much as on the landscape, whereas the coach, I would say, is more going to focus in on the individual who needs to be developed in a way and help that person kind of mold and grow. So it's a kind of a subtle distinction, and I'm not sure if that's helpful how I'm framing it, but I'm wanting to convey that this isn't just about doing a 20 or 30 minute interview with someone and figuring out their needs and then pointing them in a couple of directions and being done. It's more about being a knowledgeable liaison to a world of educational resources, and can then help a person bridge that world of resources with their individual experience and their needs at the time, and kind of open the door, much as a travel guide would, to a universe that's going to take on a life of its own. Is that helpful?
So if I it's actually very helpful, at least to me, in thinking of what's going to happen in the afternoon discussion, which I'll be able to be on, about the revising the mission of ACRE, and without being too paradigmatic, it occurs to me that it may be that ACRE is going to emerge more along the guidelines of the guide metaphor, and the Rabbinic Association may be doing more of the coaching along with some of the guide stuff, because of the relational nature as well as the confidentiality issue that you raised earlier. The denominational organizations are positioned to do some of that one-on-one or small group sharing that people don't want to do in a public setting. But ACRE may have a real role to play in terms of the guide metaphor collectively for the rabbinic community. So thank you. I'm going back on mute.
Okay. Linda.
Hi. I'm very interested in what you said about clergy not necessarily knowing what they need to learn. So in terms of one of the things that can help with that, use of personality instruments or other kind of feedback instruments that helps not only with the self-awareness, better use of self, understanding differing needs of congregants, et cetera, et cetera. To what degree did you hear about any of those kinds of things being used, and were they considered helpful?
The personality inventories and the sort of the Myers-Briggs type of thing, yeah, are used in certain sectors. I've heard about them being used kind of as tools in ministry, not necessarily so much for continuing education, though, necessarily in application. I think they're part of the orbit and part of helping people figure out where's your calling. That part of that and discernment, I think there's been a lot of openness to that, and it's being used in those areas. But it's an interesting question to see, is there more that can be done with that in terms of not only what's your calling, but how's it going for you, and what do you need to know, and where do you need to turn for that? I think it's an underused resource in that area, and I think I think this area is not especially well developed in terms of that, and that's why there's this gap of this whole area of discerning what do clergy need to know in what are called more high church traditions or hierarchical traditions, Catholic, and then slightly less hierarchical or slightly less sort of high church, Episcopal or Lutheran. You have bishops, and you have this sort of theology that allows for a bishop to say at times, there's certain things that everyone should know. There are certain areas where you, my priest, might need to focus and develop, and kind of be more instrumental in guiding. But in a lot of the Christian world, there's no such kind of top-down authority at play, and so it's more diffuse, and that whole collective discernment effort has to be figured out and done together. And so I see it as an area that's just, I don't know of lots of great examples where people are doing that discernment together, but it's certainly needed.
Which is a big challenge / opportunity for us. Deborah.
I think this is a question of clarification, but if it's not, I'm happy for it to wait. Did you hear any themes in terms of what clergy were looking for? I understand the dynamics of how delivery happens or what in settings might have been appealing, but did you hear any, let's say, we need conflict management, or we need to learn more about technology, or we need to learn more about finance? Did you see any shift with regard to that, and did you hear any thematic information?
Mm-hmm. When there were surveys done by folks who have were on the education side of things, saying how well did this work for you? That was part of some of the feedback where they said, we never used to take surveys, but then we did begin asking people about their experience on education, and also getting to know them better, asking in the surveys, how long have you been in ministry? What was your career before going into this? How did things work out with that? Was there a traumatic experience along the way that kind of galvanized this course in your life? Those types of questions, together with these educational questions, gave rise to, in this one case, a set of topics that they decided to tackle.